Okay. Okay, so today we're going to cover chapter 2 and talk about processes, and I don't know how far we'll go, but basically we want to discuss what are the different types of processes that we could expect to have within an organization, and from an operations management perspective, why is this even important to us to discuss? Okay, so last time we spoke about processes as being the different activities that people within organizations take to reach that objective that an organization is striving towards. And today we look at it from a slightly different perspective. We have organizations that fall under the services industries, and we have organizations that are mostly considered manufacturing. And when you look at processes, obviously we expect to have a pretty big difference in terms of the type of processes that businesses that fall under the services industries would have, as opposed to those in the manufacturing sector. So we're going to discuss first the services and what to expect if you ever find yourself working with the services industries, and then we'll go into discussion of manufacturing. Okay, so process strategy is basically us attempting to figure out how can we develop a strategy that will result in the manner in which activities are conducted being as efficient as can be given the resources that are available to us. So if we look at, in the textbook, you have figure 2.1, which basically summarizes processes and what managers should expect when you're considering processes. The first thing that comes to mind is, are we basically in the services industry or in manufacturing? Okay, and once we make that determination, we then make a consideration of how much customer contact should we are we going to expect? Okay, so if we're in the services, the chances are you have two options. You either have a service which has a high level of customer contact, or could be slightly less, could be much lower. Okay. An example here would be if we are, if we have a business, maybe we're a dentist's office. Okay, a dentist would expect to have a pretty high level of customer contact. You cannot be a dentist unless you're up in somebody's face, actually physically working on somebody's teeth. So we expect a really high customer contact in such a scenario. But there's certain instances where you're within the services industries, but you're not really having a constant contact with the customer. Do you think of any example of this? A service where you don't really interact with the customer as much? Amazon? Is Amazon in, let's see, what's Amazon's line of business? Are they a manufacturing or service-based company? What's the service? Distribution. Okay. So yeah, that's a perfect example of if you are in a business where you're dealing with any form of logistics, chances are that you're actually handling a product, but you're offering a service. Okay. So that would be an example here of Amazon or any other company like CRST, a logistics company that deals with the movement of goods from one location to another, but they don't do any manufacturing. Okay, so the manner in which you would be handling your processes would differ significantly here as opposed to here. Okay, chances are in this situation here, what we consider customer contact would be a customer calling a customer service rep somewhere. There's no physical face-to-face interaction between the customer and the company. There's usually a phone call or an email, something like that. here we have a situation where the customer is actually in the presence of the provider, and quality being offered here. Okay. For a service such as Amazon or CRST, what happens at Amazon is really not the customer's concern as long as they get the product that they want. Okay. So quality, or how quality is perceived, is different here as opposed to here. Here there's a lot more visual. Here has a lot more to do with efficiency of or effectiveness of the service being provided. Okay. So we make that distinction between the customer contact. We also make a distinction between what's a product and what's a process. And this then impacts how you're going to lay out your business. Okay. If I'm looking at a dentist's office, for example, what are the processes involved in going to a dentist? Let's start from the moment the customer walks in the door. So you walk into the door, you first meet a receptionist, right? So there'll be some reception desk there, and that's your stage one process. Somebody is going to process you, get your information, ask you what you're there about. If you had an appointment, they'll take that information, maybe look at your insurance, and then you move to the second stage of the process. What would that be for a dentist's office? Examining your teeth. I'll put that at the third stage. Waiting room? Yeah, the waiting room is always number 2. So you come in, there's waiting, and there's a reason why I wanted to emphasize that. And when whoever's next is available, then you go to process 3. It could be, might not be the dentist himself or herself. It could be a dental assistant, come and take some more information, maybe do an X-ray. And then finally, you have the 4th process where the dentist comes and serves you, and then you exit the system. Okay. Now, from operations management perspective, we're interested in figuring out, 1, quality is always key to any discussion of processes here. But 2, we always seek to look at how long does somebody take. So the time involved in providing that service is critical for that perception of quality. So from an operations perspective, I might want to know how much time is spent at the reception. Is it 5 minutes waiting? Would that be 10 minutes? At each stage of the operation, how much time do we take? And then that leads to the issue of queues. How can we then reduce the amount of queuing that happens in the system? Or at least if we can reduce the queue, how can we reduce the perception of a queue? Okay, and by that I mean, if I walk into the dentist's office, I expect to be served here within a pretty short period of time. I know I'm going to have to wait here, okay? There could be 2, 3 other people ahead of me. How can we reduce the perception of waiting? You could have things like having a television there, having magazines and stuff like that. So somebody who's waiting in the queue doesn't have that perception that the wait was exceedingly long, okay? So those are different things that people in the service industries might want to consider. For those businesses that have less of a customer contact, how they go about reducing that perception of time would be maybe having you leave your information and they'll call you back. That could be one option. Or they could figure out different ways in which they might make you not feel like you've been waiting on the phone for too long. Put some nice music in the background or something like that. But there's always that concept when it comes to the services industry, we're basically focusing on how can we provide a quality service given limited resources, okay? Because for most of the services, the biggest resource is the people actually engaged in providing that service. So if you have a limited number of people, you expect there to be a queue. Your focus here is on how do we reduce that queue or the perception of a queue. Okay. Resources flexibility is associated with trying to determine can these resources be used in multiple functions. In this example I have here, can that receptionist also be a dental assistant? I do not know. Can the receptionist be the dentist as well? Probably not. So there might be less flexibility here than in some other setup. And that's something that you might want to consider. And then there's a consideration of capital. How much capital is employed within a given operation. That becomes pretty important, especially maybe not here as much, but when it comes to manufacturing. How much automation can you get as opposed to having to employ people? That could reduce in a lower cost of production. So those are different things, different considerations that you'd have to make from a process perspective. But what I'd like you guys to leave this week's lessons with is this part in green is what's most important to us, process reengineering, process improvement. More than just understanding that, yes, we have processes, obviously that's pretty basic. What makes you more competitive is if you can figure out ways to make your processes better than the competition, okay? And companies that manage to figure that out usually end up being more competitive, being able to capture more market share than companies that rely on true and tested ways of doing things that they've been doing for the past 50 years. Okay. So this is going to be our focus for pretty much the whole of Friday. What are the different ways of improving your processes? How can you re-engineer a process? And this is important even for you guys as you leave here to go into the workplace, because you would be coming into a workplace which has already got an established system of doing things, okay? And while that is good because you get a certain level of quality, when you have an established way of doing things and you don't question it, you end up in a situation where you have process inertia. And process inertia basically means that your processes are satisfactory, they get the job done, but employees become used to doing a certain way of doing things and might not want to change even if there are better ways of doing things. So that's something worth taking into consideration. We might touch on this briefly at the end of the class, but it's going to be our full focus on Friday, including some calculations and charts and graphs on how to go about improving processes. Okay, so to summarize this, when it comes to the services, customer contact is very critical. That's something that in manufacturing we don't really consider as much because the customer is really not in the picture when it comes to the manufacturing process till the very end. They place an order and then they expect product. What happens in between is not as much of an issue to them. But in the services, the customer has greater visibility because they expect the service to occur in their presence in quite a number of the cases. And that changes the manner in which those processes should be conducted. Being able to customize a service, let me go back here and let's consider the food industry. Let's consider two types of restaurants here. Let's consider McDonald's and let's consider this restaurant type Fahrenheit. Okay, how many have been to Fahrenheit? Charlotte? No. Okay. This restaurant's like right on like the 28th floor of one of those buildings, and it has one really beautiful view of the city. Okay. So we have two restaurants here, okay, McDonald's, Fahrenheit. McDonald's offers food at a relatively affordable price. Fahrenheit also offers foods, same thing, burgers, fries, maybe pasta and things like that, at a slightly more costly price, okay? But now let's consider this issue of customization and how does McDonald's and Fahrenheit handle customization? from our knowledge of McDonald's, how much customization goes into their meals? A lot, little. Okay, so consider McDonald's and how they're able to give you food at a really affordable price. Their patties, the bread, and everything comes from some centralized place where they do all the manufacturing and they ship it out across the country. Okay. By the time you walk into a McDonald's restaurant, chances are that what the people in the back are doing is basically putting stuff together which has already been pre-processed, and they just putting them together within a space of like 5 minutes or so. Okay. Fahrenheit also has some components of its product that's already pre-processed, okay, but not to the same extent as McDonald's. Okay. The amount of customization here are possibly much higher than the amount of customization here. Okay, but what that means is that because of the fact that this has higher customization, they're going to have slightly higher pricing. Okay, the fact that McDonald's can standardize a lot of the processes, a lot of the what it does means that they can split costs across a whole bunch of different food items, and hence result in a much lower pricing of its food. Okay, so with the discussion of customization, one thing that we focus on is how can we offer a high level of quality or a perception of quality while reducing the costs associated with the processes that we have in place. Okay. Process divergence. The extent to which processes are highly customized. This might not really bring that out, but it does actually bring it out. It's pretty similar to customizing. And then when it comes to flow, the type of process that you're considering might not really have what's called a flow process, but at the extreme, you have a situation where you have in manufacturing, you could have product that flows, like let's take for example petroleum. When you have petroleum, the product at every stage from the extraction is considered a continuous flow process. But even this process that we had here with the doctor's office, there's a flow associated with that. And from an operations management perspective, I would be interested in how do I improve the throughput? Okay, how many people can go through the system at any given period of time? Okay, so let's look at some charts here and finish up with the services because I'm more interested in manufacturing. But this is what you should expect to when you're considering processes within the services industry. Processes are either considered front end or back office. Not necessarily that there's somebody sitting in the back office, but basically this relates to how much customer contact does a given process have or a given industry have. Okay, certain industries are considered very much front office. There's a lot of customer contact, and that will result in a different type of approach to improving processes than in a situation where, yes, it's a service industry, but most things are done away from that visibility to the customer. Okay, so I'd like to move on to a discussion of manufacturing and what are the processes in manufacturing and how does that add value to us. So in terms of manufacturing, we have four main forms of processes. You could have a job process, you could have a batch process, you could have a line process, and finally a continuous flow process. And these all kind of like we're moving from simple, basic to very complicated processes. And let's start by a review of what's considered a job process. For those who read the book, what's a job process? Anyone willing to give a definition? Job process. How many read the book? This chapter. I'm doing badly. You guys are doing really badly. Should have a snap quiz. Okay, so let's consider Chipotle. Okay, if you go to Gastonia, somewhere along Cox Road, there is a Chipotle. I didn't know that because that's the Chipotle I know around here. Used to have so many of them in Milwaukee. So Chipotle manufactures food, right? Is it Mexican, American Mexican, or but it manufactures some type of food, burritos, burrito bowls, and all that. Okay. Now, when you talk of it being the manufacturing process that goes into making that burrito being a job process, what does that entail? Customer walks in, okay, views a menu, determines what they want to order, and then the employee decides to go ahead and manufacture that eating experience, okay, putting together those different ingredients and delivering that product to the customer. Okay. Now, the reason why we call it a job is that it's each and every process is individualized to the customer when they place an order. Okay. So it's usually very specific. It's usually very usually one or two items, or not too many items per order, and there's a high level of interaction between the person placing that order and the person manufacturing that experience, even if it's in manufacturing. Okay. So we have a situation where you place an order. The people who are doing the manufacturing will put together the different ingredients that's required based off of what the customer's orders are. And the question then arises: is this highly customized? The experience highly customized? Chances are they are. What I order, if I order a burrito bowl, my burrito bowl might not be the same as the next person who orders a burrito bowl. Okay, I might want to have cheese in it. I might want to have some lettuce and stuff like that. The next person might say, no, I just want rice. Okay, so there's a high level of customization associated with job processes. And another good example here would be if you have like a machine shop where you go and machine specific items for different customers that might require products specific to what they really want. Okay? So while they use the same equipment, they have to use that equipment to deliver an experience that's unique to each and every customer walking in. Okay, so that means that chances are that there's a lot of interaction of people. Employees become a big part of this whole process experience, more than just the equipment. Okay, and you'll see that this one fact that your employees are more engaged is different and becomes less the further down you go. Okay, a batch process is slightly different in that a batch, yes, you place an order, but the order is placed for multiple units of the same item. Okay, and this is where you see, for example, when you have say the operations management club at Gardner Web deciding to order 100 shirts with the words ops management and a logo, whatever that logo is going to be. Okay, so we have a situation where again we have pretty good customer contact in terms of the customer being engaged in having a say in what goes into that logo. Okay, the design process might be a collaboration between the customer and the company, but once the company has that logo, the company then goes ahead and puts that logo onto shirts and processes pretty similar to what you'd have in a job process. Okay. The only difference here is that chances are once that logo has been created, that's something that makes it easier to replicate over and over and over again. And so the cost of doing that type of a business process goes down over the number of units that you have. Next, we have a line process. We had a chart. So when you have a line process, you're basically looking at assembly. A simple example here would be an assembly line. And an assembly line is usually when you have a product that's pretty homogeneous. You want to make boxes of cereals, and I'll have a machine that stamps different things as the product goes along the line. But you notice that now the amount of employee contact reduces pretty significantly, and automation takes over. Okay. So the costs start becoming higher here in terms of getting the right automation, the type of machinery required, and less of training and getting employees in. And that results also in a different experience. There's still a custom order that's going to be placed by your customers, but the customers have very little interaction with the product while it's being manufactured. And the same applies to the continuous flow. So the continuous flow is one where we're dealing mostly with fluids, liquids, water, oil, gas, and things like that. And for most operations that have a continuous flow, there's very little customer interaction involved until the end product has been manufactured. There's very little employee involvement here too, because a lot of what's being done once it's been set up automatically runs on its own. Okay. So the different product process matches processes, but for each and every one of these, the overall objective for us as operation management people is how do we make these processes more effective or more efficient? Okay. So that takes us into a discussion of how do we go about making any of these processes here better than what they currently are. Okay, so I'll get that stuff and read on your own in the book and talk about process reengineering and process improvement. Okay, so starting with process reengineering. Okay. When we talk of reengineering, it's just basically how do we take a process from where it is today. It might not be a bad process. It could be efficient. It could be working well. The layout we have here for the doctor's office might be working well. Our customers might like it. But how do we take it from working well to working as effectively or as efficiently as possible? Okay. So that's what we talk about process reengineering. That's basically all that we mean. How do we tailor our processes to make them as good as they can be? Okay, so to enable us to do that, you'd have to, I'm going to skip this because that's the things which we'll be discussing as we're going through Six Sigma stuff. We have to engage those key elements that are listed here. The leadership of the organization, almost always, any process reengineering process, we always engage leadership, because if they don't have that buy-in, chances are that your process reengineering efforts will fail. And then cross-functional teams come in, and this is usually pretty important for most organizations, because something that might seem like really great for one department might not work as well for another. And the example I usually have from personal experience is when you have these two teams here, your supply chain management inventory team and your sales and marketing team. You might have a process that you want to improve in inventory management here that you think if we did it a better way, will result in better results for your inventory team. Okay, and inventory, the big metrics are things like reduced inventory and stuff like that. So reductions in inventory can be achieved if they have some process improvements. But how does this then affect these guys in sales and marketing? If we reduce the amount of on-hand inventory, when I was working in a pharmaceutical company, it used to drive the guys in sales and marketing crazy. because they always wanted to see inventory available whenever the customers wanted it. So cross-functional teams become pretty important in being able to understand what are the different needs of the different departments, and how does a change in our department here affect sales and marketing? How does it affect maybe finance and accounting, and then how does it also affect maybe human resources management? Because if we make a change here, it might result in possibly a lesser need for employees or a higher need for employees. Okay. So cross-functional teams become important in trying to assess whether change would be positive throughout the whole organization. Okay. So let's look at an example of one of the most popular forms of process improvement or process reengineering. And go to Six Sigma. Okay. Hopefully you've heard of that word, Six Sigma. Okay. So Six Sigma is one of the process improvements methods that's most commonly used across the country. Pretty much every major Fortune 500 company that if you were to ever join a Fortune 500 company, most all of them have a Six Sigma team or Six Sigma teams at some given point in time. Okay, and what does this entail? When you talk of Six Sigma, from the other classes, what's Six Sigma? Why is it even called Six Sigma? Let's go back to statistics and give a quick background to that word Six Sigma. So if you remember from your statistics classes, you must have come across a shape like that once upon a time, okay? And seeing something like this. What's this curve called? Okay, for those that took my class last semester, what's this called? Statistics. Oh man, it's a difficult class. This is a normal curve, okay? Okay, and when you talk of Six Sigma, okay, we have standard deviations away from a mean, whatever this mean. So say we're looking at a process where we're trying to improve customer service levels, okay? And you currently have, in the past year, you achieved a customer service level of 92%, okay? Meaning that 92% of the times whenever an order was placed, we're able to service that order and give the product to the customer in good time, okay? But there's some variations to that. If the system was perfect, you'd have 100% order fulfillment rate, okay? Six Sigma basically looks at the fact that yes, there's going to be variations from that means. There'll be times when you deliver faster than the average and the times you deliver slower than the average. But on average, this is what this company has been doing. 92% of the times they're able to deliver a product within a given time frame, okay? So Six Sigma basically looks at 3 standard deviations above the mean, 3 standard deviations above the mean, and says, you know what, can we move from a situation where we're able to meet 92% of that service output and move it from 92% to around 99.97%, okay? Meaning, can we move our objective from whatever it is currently to almost meeting every single order that's placed within a given time frame that's been stipulated by upper level management, okay? So it basically encompasses pretty much every single order, apart from that occasional outlying order that was just a bit too much, and we're willing to say, okay, 0.03% of the time we're going to drop the ball, okay? So it then takes us through a system of trying to move it from whatever it is right now to almost 100%. Okay, so how does Six Sigma do that? It takes us through this series of 5 steps. First of all, you have to define what's the problem that we want to tackle. Okay? And Six Sigma, whenever you're having a Six Sigma process going on, you're not trying to resolve every single thing happening in the organization. The teams are usually set up for a very specific problem. Okay, if it was this problem of service levels, that's all that the Six Sigma team is going to look at for the next maybe 1 month or 2 months and try and find different ways to resolve that. And that would be different from trying to resolve everything that's happening in the sales and marketing department. How they go about is trying to determine what should we focus on. They look at what has the highest impact. Okay, if we believe that customer service has the highest impact in our ability to operate, we'd have a Six Sigma team formed to try and focus on customer service levels. Okay, so they go through this process of defining what the problem would be, and then based on the nature of the problem, we need to put in place some metrics to be able to capture how well we're doing in terms of whatever measurement it is that we're looking at. Okay, then we go into an analysis phase where we analyze the situation as is and compare that to where we want to be and how long it will take us to get from where we are currently to where we need to be. Okay, and on the basis of that analysis, then we go into figuring out our implementation. Is our implementation working? Is it improving the system, or is it worse than what we had initially? And then finally, if we decide that the process is actually improving our processes, the new change is improving our processes, then we continue doing that over time by putting in place some control measures. Okay. So how do we go about doing this? The first step, where we looked at defining, actually involves using a couple of techniques. One, which is very basic and which is usually found in most Six Sigma implementations, is the flowchart. Okay. I'd like you to take a moment from whatever it is that you're doing, whether listening to me or doing something else, and come up with a flowchart for this process. A flowchart basically shows you the step-by-step of every process that involves in doing a specific operation. But let's assume that now that I'm an analyst working at Amazon, and I want to map the process associated with an order being placed by somebody in Boiling Springs, North Carolina, from the time that order is received to fulfillment, when the order is, when the person actually gets their product. Okay, so take a moment, take a pen. I want to see how many steps can you guys come up with in terms of what you expect to happen at Amazon from the moment an order is received. Okay, and I'm going to ask each and every one of you to show me what you guys are doing. I'd like you to do this in less than 2 minutes. I'm going to do mine as well on an Excel spreadsheet because it should be easier for me. How many have worked in manufacturing here? many people had just 2 steps?
Just 2.
3 steps? 4, 5, okay, 6. Okay, more than 6. Okay. All right. So let's start with what do you think happens the moment you click that submit button on your checkout on Amazon.com? What's the next step? So what the order is received, okay, and then what do they do with the order? Okay, so it starts off with order processing. And order processing, what does that entail? So this is what happens at Amazon. Order is received, Amazon's ERP system, whether it's SAP or JD Edwards or whatever it is, will automatically, first of all, do a check of what's available in inventory. Okay, if there's something in inventory, it will automatically place an internal order and then move that to the next step. If, on the other hand, it checks its systems and there's nothing in inventory, what Amazon's system would do is to place an external order itself. So they'll place an order with whoever manufacturer, because Amazon, remember, it's services. Chances are that a lot of what they ship out to you is not manufactured by Amazon. Okay, so they would maybe place an order with the manufacturer. Okay, and that manufacturer would have to do what's called a drop shipment, which basically means rather than shipping it to Amazon first, ship it straight to the customer. Okay, so they process that order based on availability of product, where the product is and where, depending on the type of product that you're ordering, they place an order. What did you have next, Karen?
I went from orders processed to orders completed.
Okay. Okay, so completion. Okay. All right, let's get somebody to go to the 6 steps. Okay, raise the hand. 6 steps. 5 steps. What do you have? Packaging. Okay. So you order placed in packaging first, or process then packaging, and then
and then I got shipping
and delivery. Okay. What do you have?
The orders kind of go through their system, and it's distributed to employees to pick,
Okay.
and then it's packaged.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. So all very good process. The one thing that might be missing from all this is the good thing with Amazon is that you pay in advance. Okay. That money is sent to Amazon, but Amazon, remember, it's just in most cases a middleman. Okay. So there's a whole other parallel process associated with payments where Amazon receives the monies, receives the order, receives the monies, has to channel the monies to the manufacturer either before or after the manufacturer ships out product. And then that's a whole other process that could also be analyzed. Okay. So while initially it seems very straightforward, by the time you're done with the flow chart, what you would have would look up significantly complex based on the nature of the process that you're trying to deal with. Okay, this is from the textbook, which shows a swim flow chart. We'll discuss the different types of flow charts on Friday, but they could be complex because this one now includes decision making, yes, no, which what you had might not have had. Okay, so if you have a moment, just look at the Six Sigma portion of the chapter and try and understand the different graphs. So we're going to go into that and then a few calculations as well. Okay. So I'll see you all on Friday.